Let's dive into active negative harvest batches, and we are going to identify these negative harvest batches, and we are also going to talk through why these negative harvest batches happened. Before we get started, I do want to communicate that no third-party solution will save you from these compliance risks. Bad data in is bad data out. So just know that there are multiple different reasons why a negative harvest batch can happen. And if you are putting bad data into Metrc or into a third party that's integrated into Metrc, this will still happen. High level, there are three flows that can create negative harvest batches. These flows happen at the time of harvest and the workflows post harvest while you're reporting your data. This lecture, we are going to unpack a little further from the previous lecture of active harvest batch reconciliations. So I'm not going to dive into how to create this template. We are using the exact same template that we used in that previous lecture. And of course, there's the download for you as well for within this lecture for a refresher. The good news about negative harvest batches is that they're very easy to spot. And when you're in Metrc, all you need to do is sort the weight column from lowest to highest. And when you sort the weight column for active harvest batches, the negative harvest batches will arise straight at the top for you. All right, let's dive into the harvest batch red flags. So the causes for your negative harvest batches are one of the following reasons, or it could be a combination of all of these reasons. The majority of the time, the negative harvest batch occurs because you either packaged too much, you recorded too much waste, or there was a reporting error when you were reporting the wet weight at the time of harvest. And so here are the following red flags to look for. Right away, when you go into your Metrc and you take a look at your active packages, there's a few key indicators of harvest batches that might be your culprit for a negative harvest batch. And some of those reasons could be multiple harvest batches of the same strain across multiple days or weeks. And so this is really common for indoor. Sometimes indoor facilities are harvesting every like 2 to 3 days sometimes, and they might have the same strains across multiple rooms. So now they're creating multiple harvest batches of the same strain. And yes, they are in compliance because they are harvesting at the same time, but that could be a compliance risk at the time of packaging or recording your waste. The second use case to be aware of is if you missed any plants during your time of harvest and you go to create a second batch and to add more of those plants. Now, again, that might not be exactly the harvesting data entry that is the red flag, but it could be a compliance risk at the time of packaging or recording your waste. Again, similar to that previous use case, just now the reason is because we missed plants in our harvest batch. So now we need to create another harvest batch. And just to go back a little bit further, if you did catch those missed plants within your 48-hour time period of harvesting and you did not record any waste or did not record any packages, then of course you can discontinue that harvest batch and reharvest if you would like. And then the third use case to be aware of, I see this a lot of times if there are multiple people that are entering in data at once during a harvest batch, or in the third party system, if it wasn't realized that there was already a previous harvest batch created. And that is if there's extra spaces in the harvest batch, or if there's extra symbols like a period or a dash, and then the other harvest batch doesn't have those symbols. So essentially, if those harvest batches aren't exact, you are running the risk of potentially having that harvest batch pulled negative during the packaging and waste process. So high level, that was just all the red flags from the harvest batch on the time of harvesting that potentially could be a cause later down the road for a negative harvest batch. Okay, so let's talk about the data entry compliance risk that could happen. So when we're thinking about the time of harvest, when we're harvesting our plants, that wet weight and that unit of measure that you use can also be a compliance risk. So for an example, If I am thinking in pounds, but I accidentally entered my harvest batches in grams and never did that conversion unit of measure, we would be significantly underreporting what we should be submitting into Metrc for those wet weight harvest batches. The inverse could happen too if you're working in grams and you put pounds or you put kilograms or something along that nature. So when you're starting to dive into your negative harvest batches, what you want to do is drop down the history, and we're going to start taking a look at what was reported under that harvest batch. And the first place we want to start is looking at what was that wet weight that was reported in the harvest batch and what was that unit of measure, and does that truly make sense on the number of plants that were harvested. And next, we want to take a look at our unit of measures. And we want to take our look at our unit of measures during the time of packaging, during the time of reporting waste, and again, the starting wet weight. So we're starting to see a common theme here that the unit of measure is extremely important, which is why we want consistency always in our harvest batches while we are recording the wet weight, reporting the waste, and reporting the packages. Because if you start using inconsistent unit of measures and you don't do those conversions properly, those weight conversions, then you run the risk of underreporting or overreporting and overpulling in your harvest batch. Next would be reporting too much waste. So it's not exactly a unit of measure conversion, but maybe too much waste was reported in the incorrect harvest batch. And so we actually reported more waste than what we harvested within that harvest batch. And then the same goes for packaging. We can also over-report with too much packaging. So again, we package too much than what we originally recorded within that wet weight. And you can have a situation where you recorded too much waste and you recorded too much of that packaging weight. And when you are potentially reporting too much waste or too much packages, it might be because you're recording it out of the incorrect harvest batch. So let's go take a look at our mock audit and our template and get a visual on all of these data points that we're talking about.